All right, welcome back to Pod Save the Youth. I'm your host, David Seaton, and today we are joined by a fantastic guest, someone who is very versed in presidential politics, in the administration. And would you like to give a brief introduction?
Hi, David, and hi, all. My name is Louisa Terrell, and I am a senior advisor on the Harris campaign and have spent the last 2 decades working on Capitol Hill, working in White Houses, working in transitions, and then some stints in the private sector and philanthropic centers.
All right, well, we're happy to have you. I just have a few questions for you about the presidential debate and the state of the current presidential race. I know you work for the Harris campaign right now, and you worked in the Biden administration on the legislative policy side of things. So let's start with one of the most important issues to voters in this election, the economy. On Tuesday night, this was the first issue that was mentioned on the debate stage, and Vice President Harris was asked to defend her and President Biden's economic record over the past 4 years, passing bills like the Inflation Reduction Act to fight the climate crisis and lower healthcare costs, and the CHIPS and Science Act to support domestic manufacturing. That said, the economy remains a major liability for the Harris-Walz campaign, with Trump currently holding a 10-point lead on the issue in recent polls. So do you believe that the Biden-Harris administration should have done more legislatively during their time in office over the past 3.5 years to assuage some of the concerns that Americans still have about the economy?
Look, you raise a really important issue, which is it is expensive every day. And that is a worry for Americans across the country. It doesn't matter if you're in a city, if you're in a rural environment, if you're in the suburbs, costs are high. That is something that I think when President Biden came into office, we were obviously in the throes of COVID and all of the destabilization that did for our economy. And he really endeavored to sort of put into places in an immediate way to start rectifying where our economy was. And there have been things that you've seen in this debate so far when you look at housing costs, for instance, you look at the price of eggs, you look at gas prices, those kinds of things that like everyday people who may not be thinking of politics 24/7 are thinking about. I think the Biden-Harris administration, you cannot overstate the where our economy was when President Biden assumed office. And so for him to be able to do 2 pieces, which is what we do with the American Rescue Act and about how we were able to sort of put things in place to sort of in that stabilization. And then you saw him do something else, which is to come in on the back end and do things like infrastructure, chips, these are 800,000 new manufacturing jobs in America alone. And every moment of the day when I was negotiating whatever the legislative initiatives were, Biden sort of went in there and was always thinking about sort of both worker rights, was thinking about fair pay. So we push those in all sorts of ways in which there are programs that states or companies can avail themselves to that are talking about living wages. Now, that being said, David, there is still prices that are too high. And I think communicating to American public who have not necessarily been thinking about this all the time, I think that's always a challenge. And I think in particular, this sort of COVID hangover, like no one wants to talk about COVID.
Last Tuesday night, Vice President Harris in the debate was asked about her plans to secure the border, and she stated that she did support the bipartisan immigration compromise bill that was killed by President Trump when it was proposed to Congress, even after being written by one of the most conservative senators in the United States Senate, Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma. Soon after the bill's failure, the Biden-Harris administration came out with a new executive order that significantly cut down on the number of immigrants that were able to seek asylum at the U.S.-Mexico border. So I'll ask you kind of the same question that the moderators asked Kamala Harris. Since the Biden administration took actions to secure the border in recent months through their executive action, why did they not do this earlier if they viewed this as a crisis?
Mm-hmm. Immigration, and again, I've worked on Capitol Hill for many, many years. So I have been involved in comprehensive immigration reform updates 2006, 2007, 2011, 2013. This is something President Bush was interested in. This has been an issue that has not been dealt with by Congress in a meaningful way for 2 decades. And there is this consensus, if you walk around with policymakers, and even from both sides of the aisle, that there is just enormous reform that has to be done here that is going to make a safe, secure border and also provide pathways to citizenship, which, quite frankly, if you and I went to the business roundtable or any chamber of commerce in America right now, there are going to be business community members who are saying immigration reform is critical. And that means a workforce, a steady workforce, again, where people are out of the shadows, they have worker rights. So I think this question of what this president and this administration has done is President Biden delivered one bill on the first day of his administration, one bill only, a comprehensive immigration reform. He said to Congress, I am here, my door is open, please come talk about it. And there have been lots of pieces along the way that have looked at some of the global reasons, particularly in Global South, about immigration reform that the president and the vice president have worked on. And I think there are tools that we've employed intermittently over time, and that those have been showing themselves to be effective for what you want. But let's not kid ourselves. If there's a crisis, then that actually means that Congress and a White House, whoever the White House is, that it's the responsibility of them to tackle that together. And this Congress made a very distinctive choice not to tackle it.
Yes, absolutely. And two of the issues that the Harris campaign has been focusing on that they, really want to talk about are the issues of gun violence and abortion rights. They're also two of the issues that are hardest to take action upon due to that congressional inaction and gridlock that you talked about. In the debate, Kamala Harris made note of the fact that she and Tim Walz are both gun owners. While supporting the Second Amendment, they also support legislation to ban assault weapons, increase background checks on gun buyers, and raise the minimum age to purchase guns from 18 to 21. In the first action to end the gun violence epidemic in the United States in nearly 30 years, the White House in 2022 pushed for and passed in the U.S. Congress the Safer Communities Act, which would incentivize states to adopt red flag laws and increase background checks on gun buyers, among other things. Also on the debate stage, the issue of abortion rights was a major topic of debate between the two candidates. In the beginning months of the Biden administration, she pushed for the passage of what will be known as the Women's Health Protection Act. And later, after the Dobbs v. Jackson decision came down from the Supreme Court, allowing states to ban abortion as they see fit, the Harris-Walz campaign and the Biden-Harris administration supported legislation to return the United States to the precedent of abortion rights that was set by Roe. Obviously, both of these issues of gun violence and of abortion rights are major important issues to voters in this race, and they're issues that the Harris campaign wants to be talking about because they energize and motivate traditionally Democratic voters to get out there and participate. So Harris in the debate talked about plans to ban assault rifles. She talked about her intention to restore the precedent of Roe. How likely do you think that those plans are from the legislative side to get passed through a Congress that is particularly likely this year to have a Republican Senate?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm like a policy wonk and someone who I get deep in the weeds really quick in Congress. So what I hear from your question in particular is how do you tackle these issues if we're in an environment of a divided Congress, right? You don't have unified government. And you layer on top of that a complexities of very small margins. Rather, that makes it very hard to do. I think, look, I'm a hopeful gal. You don't survive in D.C. without being a hopeful gal. I think that what I've thought is that it's pretty interesting to me that we've seen such a change on American sentiment, particularly around gun violence. I mean, when I came to Congress, in 2 decades ago, this was a topic that just sort of scared the Democratic Party, or we were very clear. The way that debate has changed in a fairly short period of time, I think gives me great hope that there could be ways in which, particularly on assault weapon bans, like weapons of war, that we can continue to advance that conversation from a bipartisan perspective. And look, I'll just tell you, the issue, I mean, you just look at the way that abortion and reproductive rights have shown up in whether it's in the 22 midterms, whether it's in 23 special elections, what's happened in Ohio, for instance. This issue matters to people and is crossing partisan lines, and it'll be very interesting. Like, one of the things you and I am sure will pore over is to look how reproductive freedom is going to shape this campaign.
One of the other major issues that was discussed in the debate was election integrity. And notably, the Biden-Harris team took office right in the wake of January 6th. Over their time in office, the Biden-Harris administration successfully pushed for and passed the Electoral Count Act to clarify the role of the vice president in the presidential transition process. This was designed to prevent the situation that occurred on January 6th, where Vice President Pence was blamed by a large number of Republicans and activists on the right wing for not overturning the election, a job that he could not do, but some Republicans still claimed he could do. So the Electoral Count Act clarified that role. But still, even in the wake of that, on the debate stage, Donald Trump refused to say whether or not he would support the results of the 2024 presidential election if they did not go his way. And that is one of the most concerning things for me as a young person, as a person involved in this political process, and as a person who values our democracy. And I hope everyone sees after last week's debate the true contrast between the two candidates in this race, a contrast that could not be more clear. And in our generation, for young people, a lot of the time we don't see the difference between two candidates because we want a politics that is more representative of our values, and that's fair. But we also need to realize that there will never be a politician that we will agree with 100% of the time unless we run ourselves, which we should do. And until that day, every single election is a choice between two binary options. And if you watched last week's debate, those options between a candidate who supports the right of women to make decisions over their own bodies, the right of every young person to grow up in a world that is able to sustain them, on a planet that is able to sustain them, with a president who acknowledges the most existential threat to our generation and our lives, the climate crisis, and a choice between a candidate who does not believe in the freedom of young people to go to school and not be worried that they will be shot dead due to an act of gun violence. That is the choice in this race. That is the choice that young people have to make. And the choice for me could not be more clear. And quickly, before we end here, what is your message to young voters? I know the Harris campaign is really invested in getting the youth vote out.
I mean, look, I say to us, enthusiasm doesn't mean votes. We need every single person. We are not taking any vote for granted, and we need all hands on deck. And we need your leadership. We need your voice. We need your work. And the world is an interesting and complex place, so there are ways to get engaged in kind of a blended organizational model, either online or with your feet. And please find a way to like fit into the sort of puzzle, because we need you.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a good day. Thanks for listening to Pod Save the Youth.
Oh my God, that was like speed talking, right?
Yeah.
Dude, you went right in on the hard stuff.